All right, I think folks are making their way in, and so we'll give it about a minute to give folks a chance to slowly make their way in. But we're super excited about this webinar, and I know there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be joining, and so it's going to be very exciting. And so let's see where we're at, but I want to also be mindful of time, so we want to get started pretty close to the start time. But thanks everyone for joining us today. And I'm very special thank you to our speakers and moderator for today's webinar session. And so I'm Jason Padilla, and I am your technical host today for this new series webinar session in the Plantae webinar series. Next slide. This webinar series is brought to you by Plantae, the open online community for plant scientists powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special thank you to all of our members who are attending today. Your membership dues help support making this webinar possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and use discount code %10 to receive a 10% discount on your registration. ASPB members get early access to this webinar, and you can learn more about ASPB and the other opportunities we provide at aspb.org. Next slide, please. In addition, please be sure to check out our YouTube channel, where you can find many other exciting talks, such as like this. Next slide. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure that you get the most out of your experience in today's webinar. If you're experiencing technical issues, please let us know of those using the chat box or emailing me at jpadilla@aspb.org. If you have questions for our guests, please add them to the Zoom Q&A section. Sabrina and Miriam will be sharing those with our presenters and answering them accordingly. If you have trouble connecting or need to leave the webinar early, know that a recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel. So be sure to follow our YouTube channel to receive notifications when new content are posted. All right, now I'm going to turn the floor over to Sabrina and Miriam, who will moderate today's session and share a bit of information about the work of ASPB Women in Plant Biology section. Take it away, Miriam and Sabrina.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maryam Rahmatishka. I'm a postdoc at Boyce Thompson Institute at Magda Yorkovska Lab, working on root system architecture. Today, alongside with Sabrina Chen, we are going to moderate this webinar, which is about how to write your research statement for an R1, R2 tenure track professorship in the United States. We also have two great panelists, Dr. Eva Ferry, is an associate professor from Michigan State University, and also Eva serves as a chair of the Women in Plant Biology. And we have Dr. Sonali Roy, an assistant professor at Tennessee State University. Next slide, please.
You're muted. Sorry. So I am your other co-moderator for today, Sabrina Chin. I am a research associate at UW Medicine, and I work on root development and functions such as root gravity response and root hair biology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Women in Plant Biology does. Our vision is to foster a plant biology community that fully embraces rich diversity and gender equality. And our mission is to promote gender equality, diversity, career development, and leadership in the plant sciences. So we have a lot of committee members, as we've previously introduced Ava, who is the chair. And we have other members who are Andrew, Sibongili, Jani, Diane, Rebecca, Mariam, and a new early career rep, Buju, who is replacing me. Next slide, please. So as an example of the activities that we do include Women's Young Investigator Travel Award. So we typically advertise that maybe in like April for the July ASPB Plant Biology Conference, career development webinars and workshops such as this one, because we believe that transparency helps people to actually get into the job market. Also, we do work on equality, diversity, and inclusion policies. The most recent one is trying to get family leave policies with the NSF for fellowship recipients. We do publish work and try and improve visibility and recognition of women scientists. Next slide.
So, well, the outline of today's webinar will be first, we are getting to know our panelists and learn about their basically experiences in the application process and serving on the search committee, and also the overall format and structure for a research statement. And then we get to the Q&A, and we close our webinar with the concluding remarks and providing helpful links. Next slide, please.
Hello, I'm Eva Farre. I'm at Michigan State University. As Marian said, I'm the current chair of the Women in Plant Biology. My lab works on circadian rhythms in plants in algae. I did my PhD in Germany, and then had a postdoc position at the Scripps Research Institute and University of California, San Diego. And then from there, I moved to my faculty position at Michigan State, where I'm still at. Next slide, please.
Thank you. My name is Sonali Roy. I'm an assistant professor at Tennessee State University, and I'm going to be one of the panelists today. My research program centers around small signaling peptides in the model Legume Medicago truncatula, and I'm trying to understand how they can help us help the plant acquire more nitrogen and establish more efficient root nodule symbiosis. I completed my PhD at the John Innes Center in UK, and after that I moved to Oklahoma, where I did my postdoc at the Noble Research Institute. And as of January 2021, I am an assistant professor at the Tennessee State University, College of Agriculture. So I am going to start the talk today, the presentation today, by thanking both Miriam and Sabrina for inviting me. And I'm really happy to be presenting this because I went through this recently, and I feel like I have a lot of advice to give because I suffered. And I suffered, so you don't have to, right? I'll start with the academic job search process and then go into the finer details of the research statement. So if you're interested in applying to a professorship at an R1 or an R2, typically this academic job search begins with the department posting and opening. And so it's posted on Plantae jobs or other sites. And then people start sending in applications. This is received by the department, and there's usually a deadline within which you should really try to submit these documents. Then there is a search committee which evaluates these documents. So they read through all the documents that you've submitted, and then they shortlist people they would like to have in their department, and they think they're worthy colleagues. And so to further shortlist them, what they do is usually you get an invitation for a Skype or now a Zoom interview. And once, let's say there are 30 people for offsite interviews, and then they are shortlisted to the top 3 or 4 for on-site interviews. And once this happens, there is finally an offer is made to the best candidate, and the job is accepted, hopefully. From the applicant side, we know that faculty job application materials required to apply include a CV, a research proposal or a research statement, a teaching philosophy statement, recommendation letters, and a cover letter. A search committee typically consists of 5 to 10 faculty members in the hiring department, and they are the ones who will be reading all your documents. The offsite interview, like I said, it's usually a 20 to 30 minute call. on Zoom. And finally, then there is, if you're shortlisted, you go to an on-site interview, which is usually a 2-day interview process in which you're asked to present a research talk, a teaching demonstration, and you then meet with all your colleagues. In very research intensive in institutes and universities, there is also a chalk talk in which you present how you're going to get funding, basically. After this, once you are the top candidate, there is a negotiation with the dean or the chair of the department or the search committee. And once once both parties have been satisfied, offers are made on paper. So this paper that that is on the reference to which is at the bottom of the slide, it uses information from 317 applicants in the 2018-2019 academic jobs cycle. And there were, of these 317 people, there was a total of 7,644 applications which were sent out. And there was there was an average of 15 applications that were sent out per applicant. It varied from someone who just sent one and they got that job and they accepted it to 250. So there were people who did send out a lot more to get one job offer. But what was seen that people who applied to 15 jobs typically get 2 remote interviews, which then translate into 2 on-site, and the average is then 1 job offer. So while there is a correlation that if you apply for more than 15 jobs, you do get more off-site or on-site interviews, but that does not correlate with the number of job offers received. So in the end, these documents can help you get to that interview stage, but it's something else that the faculty, the search committee is looking for when they meet you and how you interview. That's what guarantees the job itself. So my experience was also very similar. I was on the job market for 1 year, although I wish I had gone on the job market the year before to get some experience and perfect my documents. But so I applied to jobs starting October 2019, which was just before the pandemic. I applied to 18 jobs. I got 2 Skype interviews, 2 on-site interviews, and then 1 job. For me, I applied to several jobs, which were just general plant biology. I never got callbacks from them. But if there were very specific job advertisements, such as the first one I got, which was plant chemical biology, and I could convince them how peptides are plant chemicals and just fit in within their job requirement. And that worked very well for me. So the first, I got a Skype interview in December 2019. And I was so lucky that just before the pandemic, I got a full interview. So I got to have that experience of going to the university for 2 days, meeting with people, etc. But I did not get the job. And the second interview that I got was for gene editing. And this is something that I had done during my postdoc. So since the job advertisement specifically asked for this expertise, I could demonstrate that I have this expertise and what they need. So this worked too. But just after the Skype interview, the pandemic hit, and it was, the hiring freezes everywhere. So it was a very, very scary time. So even the institute that I was working at, they would not renew my contract. They would not hire anybody else. So it was quite problematic. But then I did the full interview in May, and I received the offer in July. And it was just to show that, because as an immigrant, my visa was about to expire on the 4th of January. So this was the next few months were torturous. Yeah, I had to wait for the job offer, get the H-1B approved, etc. But I did start on the same day that my US visa would have expired. And also the postdoc research institute that I was at, almost just 3 days later, they shut down plant biology research. So I'm just so grateful to have this job, really. So, okay. So from here, then, let's move on to the topic of this webinar. And so before we start, I just want to make sure that we are clear on what this webinar is going to be about. For example, I am not going to tell you how to make a competitive track record, right? We are already assuming that everybody on this call has done excellent science, and they really, they have great ideas, and they want to go on to be a PI, and that's why they're on this call. So you have a competitive track record. I'm assuming that. I'm sure you do, actually. So, and also what I'm not going to talk about is that how to identify a research program that you want to build on, because this is so area specific. When we cannot do this as a webinar. So I'm already assuming you know what your future plans are, what research questions are the most interesting in your field, and you can build your own research statement. But what we are going to talk about is that all the work that you have done, all the research achievements that you have done, we're going to talk about how we can present it competitively so it's most accessible to reviewers who are reading your job documents. And I'm certainly not an expert. I want to say this right at the beginning, but I did go through this process recently, and I also did a lot of reading on what is good. And so I think I can make it condensed and present it to you, everything that I have learned. So the most important job document arguably is the cover letter. But usually there are several webinars covering how to write a good cover letter. So I really appreciate the fact that Sabrina and Mariam decided to organize a webinar on research statements, which is not so commonly talked about. So a research statement typically it has a general format of 2 to 4 pages, which describes your past research accomplishments and future research plans. These are big picture ideas. And usually there are 2 to 3 main research questions or research areas that you touch on in your research statement. If you look at the job description, or which are posted, they're usually they all are research statements, but some wording can be different. So it can be statement of research accomplishments and future objectives, and this is combined, or there can be a statement of research objectives and brief description of research accomplishments, and they ask you for separate documents. Or it can be a summary of research accomplishments and clearly focused description of future research. So these are all the same things, but they do specify some variations in formatting. So you have to be, if a job application asks for a certain format, make sure you give it to them, even if it just means rearranging your text. But it is very, very important that you follow the instructions in the job advertisement and give them that. Okay, so we are also talking about very research-intensive universities within the United States. But what does that really mean, right? What are these R1 and R2 universities? So R1 and R2 universities are designated as such by the Carnegie Classification of Institutions of Higher Education. And this is based on, this is just to simplify and categorize universities based on their priorities. So, but there are many commonalities between R1 and R2 universities. So they are research-intensive universities, and they provide at least 20 doctoral degrees per year. They spend at least $5 million in research per year, and they can both be either private or public. But R1 universities, which are usually equivalent to research institutes, typically have very high research activity. There are 146 institutes of these within the US, and both what these universities have is high research capacity. So they have a lot of facilities, and they also have a high density of people conducting research. Our 2 universities also have high research activity. They have 135 institutes within the world and within the US, sorry. And so there are, but they have either very high research capacity or facilities, or they have a high density of people conducting research. R2 universities might have higher teaching load, and they may offer more master's programs. I work at Tennessee State University, which is an R2 university, but my job is 90% research and 10% service. So I'm not required to teach, so it can vary. Okay, so what are hiring departments looking for, right? Who is our audience? Who is reading our statements? And what are they looking for? So the first I'd like to say is that when what hiring departments are looking for is someone capable of preparing a competitive tenure package in 5 years. What that means is that if we hire you, in 5 years, we don't want to let you go. We want to keep you here, right? This is so much effort. It takes everybody's time. And so we really don't want to lose the people we hire. So right now is the most important decision we could be taking. So how do you demonstrate that you're capable of preparing a competitive tenure package is to show that you can summarize your research accomplishments and write a cohesive statement. So you have to demonstrate that you're a competent writer. So for sure, no grammatical errors on this statement. There cannot be one. The second thing that they're looking for is a research leader who can bring in funding. Yeah, not only for the research, but for overhead costs, which I had to learn about this year. So overhead costs are what the department gets funding. It takes a certain percentage of the grant funding that the federal government provides, and that's used for various things within the department itself. So how do you demonstrate you're a research leader? Is you show that you have a research vision. You know where you're going. You are able to identify the most important research questions in your field, and you can think of ways in which to address them. And finally, we are also looking for a pleasant colleague who can collaborate and share some of the teaching and service load. So this one was very hard for me in the beginning when I was writing, because I was a postdoc, right? And so I was, when I used to speak, I spoke like a postdoc. What does that mean? It's like my advisor says, or so, you know, many times I used to just bring that, but this is exactly what you don't want to do. So you want to project a sense of equality. You're a colleague. You're not a postdoc anymore, right? So every time you write, think like that. Think not as a postdoc, let's say. Okay, so the fundamental rule of writing any job statement is that you have to think that who's reviewing your job document is a scientist. And as a scientist, we need evidence. Yeah, we've been trained over and over again to not just believe something someone tells you. We need evidence. So really, why should I believe you? So the academic skepticism principle recommends that we show, not tell. What that means is when you write your research statement, cite your own published work. So you don't say, I am so excited about this research field. Demonstrate it by showing that you've continuously been productive and you've added to the knowledge that is out there in your field. The second thing is I will be a great grant writer. No, what you should do is you could include some preliminary data from your postdoc, which could be built on into a future grant. And finally, also, it is a good idea to mention work performed with student mentees, because as a PI, as an independent PI, you are not going to be doing the research typically, but you are going to be expected to train other students. So it's a good way to demonstrate, even in your research statement, that you can perform with other students. You can do work with other students. Okay. So there is this book, which is called The Professor is In, and it's, this is it, and it's the best use of $10 you can do for your own academic career and job statements. It's by Professor Karen Kelsky, and I think it's a great book. So a lot of the material that I'm going to be presenting today is what she recommends in this book. And what she recommends is, as a template, is to, when you write the research statement, so center it. So write that this is the research statement. So it makes it clear for whoever's going to read it. Write research statement at the top of your page, write your name, and write the title of your research statement. So make sure that your font size is Arial or Times New Roman these are usually sans serif fonts, which are most commonly used. Don't use atypical fonts, Comic Sans, no, and others, right? Just because they're beautiful, they cannot be read easily. Keep the font size 11 to 12 points. Minimum line space should be 1. Don't go to 1.5 or 2, and don't go less than 1. Do not extend the margins. That makes it look very bad. So keep the standardized 1-inch margins, and write it in such a way that there is a chronological description of your past achievements to present and the future. So what she says is that you should typically, you could think about your research statement in 6 different paragraphs, when the first paragraph is a broad introduction to the topic, where you cite primarily your own work. Don't cite the work of other scientists as much, because you want to keep reminding the reader that you're the expert in this area. The paragraph 2 is usually major research findings from, let's say, your PhD, and this should highlight your skills or your ability to work with others, etc. And then lead on to outline of the first project. This is usually a big picture question, so do not include experimental details as much, but outline methodology. And the paragraph 4 then is major research findings, let's say from your postdoc, and the next paragraph outlines a second project, and the final paragraph is a summary. You also need to include references. I use the science citation style, which is really small. It doesn't take up much space. That's why I use it. And what I've also said is it's a good idea to use subheadings, because it makes it reader friendly. And also I would recommend using either bold, italicized, or underlined text to emphasize something that you want people to read, so it just stands out. Not everybody likes it, as I know from Twitter, but I like it. I use it and it works for me. So this is what Karen Kelsky suggests, and this is adapted from what she suggests. And so what I did was take what she suggested, because she's more of a social scientist, and I used it for plant science, or the hard sciences. And this is what I did. So as you can see, it says research statement, Sonali Roy. It says regulation of nitrogen acquisition by peptide hormones. That is the title of my research. And then I provide an introduction in which I say, I provide an overview of nitrogen and root nodule symbiosis, a summary of known peptides in nitrogen acquisition and nodulation. And then I start off with the overarching question, which hasn't been answered in my field. So I say, how do legumes integrate nutrient signaling pathways and the symbiosis signaling pathways to acquire nitrogen from their environment? And to address this, then I outline a project. So I outline the first question. And then I divided it into sections. So the aims, the rationale, the past experience. So I highlighted my work on hormones during my PhD, and how peptides are also hormones and how it connects them. So there's a theme throughout this research statement. And then I outline the objectives. So I'll use transcriptomics, I'll use genetics. I do not go into this primer will be used to find this mutant or whatever. Yeah, I don't give the details here. Then I outline a second project. Also, if you notice that it's a good idea to think about what research bodies you're going to target, so USDA or NSF. And then again, so I had the aims, rationale, past experience, objectives, etc. And I had 3 such projects. Then I summarized it, talked about a broad overview and how it will contribute to the broad research area. And then I cite my own work, which I've done for this section. So I think figures are a very visual way, and I am a visual person. So I do include figures in my statement, and it's a great idea to do that. So one way is to summarize what is known in the field. So this I took from a review I wrote, and I modified it to make it more for my research statement. And then the second figure that I'm showing you is also the 3 projects that I proposed. I summarized them as figures also, so they could see what was the question being asked, the methodology, and what would be the outcome from these three approaches. I never thought of this as much, but for those of you who are applying now, it's a good idea to just explore what you would be eligible for within the 5 years of your tenure. So there's something called the National Science Foundation Career Awards, which is one of the most prestigious awards that the US offers for early career faculty. There is a new one for R2 universities, which is the building research capacity of faculty in biology. Then there are several agriculture USDA seed grants. And then there are, of course, the big ones, which you can apply to, which is the Plant Genome Research Project, Plant Biotic Interactions, and there are several more. But the first two is what you could suggest that you would target in your research statement. Okay, so one thing that I really want to highlight here is that this is not a grant proposal. There are several people on this call, I imagine, who are used to writing the NSF postdoctoral fellowship or the graduate research fellowship, and those might differ in how you write the proposal versus how you would write a research statement. So again, in the grant proposal, you say, I'd like to identify binding receptor candidates using co-immunoprecipitation followed by mass spec, whatever. Yeah, and then you write the experimental details. We will overexpress peptides. We will synthesize biotin labeled peptides. We will pull down this receptor. We will use this as a control, etc. But this is not what you need to include in a research statement. In a research statement, you keep it broad. Right? You explain the rationale that there are efforts to find these receptors, but there are a handful known. Yeah. And you cite your own work. Then I said, during my postdoc, I developed a collection of TNT1 mutant insertion lines in these receptor classes. And my objective then is to combine reverse genetic approaches with biochemical techniques to identify peptide ligand receptors. So there is a big difference between grant proposal and research statement, and do not blur the lines when writing your own statements. So some of the do's for your statement, I would say, is the first step towards writing well is to write badly. So just start writing. You really, if you don't start, you're not going to finish, right? So the first step towards writing well is to write badly and then edit it so many times that it gets better. And you should think about writing for a non-expert plant scientist. So just because I study legumes, you could be working on Arabidopsis and other plant species, right? So do not assume that people will know the most common, obvious things in your research field. And I would also say it takes a long time to write these statements, right? It's 1 to 3 months, I think. So 1 month just completely dedicated to writing these documents and then keep editing. And how do you edit is you ask feedback. So you either a trusted mentor, informal mentor network, or colleagues. For me, I had 2 people who read my statements. One was a friend of mine and one was Mary Williams. So I'm really grateful for the time that they invested in me. And try to always use the active voice. Don't go so much to the passive voice. This was done by me. No, I did this. And during my postdoc, I did this or whatever. Then stick to page limits. Pay very close attention to the wording used in a job advertisement. This goes without saying. Okay, so then some of the don'ts, and I am saying I made all these mistakes, so you don't have to. So at first, I only started with 1 page. I was like, no, this research statement has to be 1 page. But it's not enough. It's not enough room to explain ideas. So yeah, you do need to go 2 to 4 pages, but don't go beyond that. I'd say nobody's has that much time to really read through the documents. Then the other thing is, again, like I said, don't say things like, I'll be continuing this sub-project of my postdoc advisor's research that I plan to bring with me. This is obvious, yeah? You don't do research in your basement. You do it in your postdoc advisor's lab, but you don't say it. It suggests that you're not an independent thinker, right? So you add on to what you did and you suggest what could be done. And then don't use any of the following, which is, this question is so fascinating, interesting. It's an amazing question to be answered. Or, I'm really passionate about this research area. No, just again, don't use these words. Demonstrate that you are. right? Or even don't say, I attempt to, I hope to, I try to, I believe that. So if either it's do or you do not. So you say, I will do this. I have achieved this, etc. So don't use emotions. Or wishfulness in scientific writing. Just keep it very something like that you could publish in the end. Again, like I said, minimize experimental details. Instead, write a broad methodology that we'll use. And this, at this point, you could be showcasing your expertise that, oh, I know this. And so, I could offer collaborations within the department. So you can demonstrate that you're a person who's bringing skills that others in the department might not have. And lastly, I'd say just don't cram all your ideas into the statement. We all have a lot of ideas, right? And you can use them for grant proposals later on, but choose the top 2 or 3 and explain that really well. So with that, I'm just going to show some of the successful research statements, and you can find a lot more at the RI Lab GitHub repository. And I'm just going to show you 3 of my favorite ones. So the first one is Magdalena at BTI. And what I like about her statement is what I've highlighted in red. So if you read that, she talks about plant architecture responds to changing environment by optimizing the balance between investment in new organs and the cost of maintenance. And then she says, although the above mentioned traits have important roles in plant performance, they're often studied separately. So the narrative is really beautiful. So it's she talks about the status of the field, then she talks about what is missing, and then she talks about how she will address this. So this is a very, very nice flow of research ideas. And then, as you can see, that she also provides some preliminary data. And what I really liked here is what she says, the presented data was obtained at Professor Mark Tester's group, which agreed to share it as preliminary resource. So this is her postdoc mentor, but she doesn't say this is from the lab of my postdoc mentor. She treats him as a colleague, Professor Mark Tester. Yeah, and this is what we should be doing as well. So I thought this was great about this. The second one, also, I really enjoyed reading Alexander Bucker's statement. And so he outlines 3 different research themes in his research statement. And when he talks about for each of these, he highlights the accomplishments. So he says, as a postdoc, I developed this model. And these were my key collaborators. And for the future work, then he talks about how that model will be used for the research in his lab. So again, I really liked how he did it. And finally, this was also one of my favorite research statements. So this author also has 3 different ideas, 3 different research areas, and he also writes about the target funding sources. And as you can see, he says, he highlights technologies such as bio-nano optical mapping and long-read sequencing technologies like PacBio will be used to identify within species source of variation. So he's not giving experimental details, but he's saying these techniques and these technologies are what I'm very familiar with using, and these will be used further. So with that, I'm going to let Eva talk about what it's like to be on the hiring side of this. And Eva, please go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Sonali. Sonali did great overview of how to write these research statements. So I just want to put a little bit of perspective from the other side. As I said, I'm currently in a search committee, and I just want to highlight some of the aspects. So make sure that when you explain your research contributions, that those match your CV. So your research statement is a way to explaining your different papers. So you need to explain, as Sonali said, your intellectual drive, your vision, but most importantly, your intellectual or technical contribution, in particular if you have collaborations where the papers that come out, you are not the first author. So again, highlight your successes and make sure it flows nicely. So you have to have a global vision. Even if you change from working from animals to plants, you need to give the reader a sense of a flow through of a story that they are reading. So your previous research need to flow well into your future research plan. And here, as Sonali said, you need to get your colleagues excited. So they need to read your research question. And here I don't want to overly emphasize that you want to have it, get feedback from people, scientists, but outside your field. So when I did write mine, I had my friend who's a neuroscientist, I had a biologist and a physicist read my research statement, and there were invaluable feedback. So again, you want to show that you would be a great collaborator, somebody the other people can come back for expertise, and that most importantly, you can get funding. So if you have had funding with fellowships, it's really important, and have a great plan for getting more funding. That's kind of the currency of the situation we are now. So, and also highlight how your expertise fits the advertisement and use that language, as Sonali said, and also make research about what your colleagues are working on and find ways where you could interact with them before writing your research statement. So I think that's it. Next slide, please. So we want to go over the package ranking. That's a process we are going over right now. So we get, if you, depending on your search, you might get, 200 applicants or something like this. So you want to write your statement. We are in the search committee, you're going fast over this, no? Each of them, you need to read 30, 40 of these. So you need to highlight. So I really like the highlight idea that Sonali says. Make sure, oh, Sonali, can you change the slide, please? Yep. So we will be screening to a smaller pool for which we might be asking letters for. So the initial screen is just looking for a good match to what we are looking for. And of course, people that have the standards that we're looking for. Then the selection committee goes into the details of each application. We narrow it down to a smaller pool that might be 20, depending on the search, maybe 20 people, maybe 15. And then the other faculty value in, and we get to a narrower pool for in-person interviews. And sometimes there is an online interview step, as Sonali said. So next slide, I think we should be all done with the presentation. So we have some time now for questions.
Someone has posed a question. The question is, how do you tailor your statement to very specific job calls? The person also wrote that, I know especially BIPOC scientists tend to self-select out of the process earlier if the job calls are highly specific, and was wondering if you had any advice on ways to convince yourself and the hiring departments that you will be a good fit, even if you don't fit in that box as closely as the call would suggest.
Can I take that one?
Sure.
I recently told, there was a fellowship application and I was like, you are not going to get it, so don't apply. And then I wasted time just thinking that, no, you definitely are not the best, so don't apply. But the thing is, you are not a judge of your own worth. You shouldn't think of it that way. So you should, or your job is to apply. And it's the department's job to select or not. So remove these self-doubts. It's very hard to in the beginning, but you will be much better for it. Just apply and they will decide whether you're good or not.
Yeah, I think that's my general feeling as well. And again, most of the searches, we're looking for the best person. So the best person, even if it does not fit, right? If you get an awesome person that might not fit, and say, oh, maybe we look for that other skills in another search. So again, you can always wordsmith and tweak your things slightly, so there's great flexibility in that if you want to turn in one angle or the other. And if you really like that position, you need to be passionate about it. So if you really think that yourself would fit, you should go for it.
Thank you, Eva. So our next question is, do you think that the international postdocs have lower chances to get a position in the US due to their basically fluency in the English speaking?
Oh, may I say something there? I make sure your statement is correctly written. So if your statement has English mistakes, it will clearly demonstrate that you cannot write a proposal and get funding. So you need to get the help you need. But even if your English is not perfect, the more risky aspect of being maybe doing your postdoc abroad is that you are not familiar with the US funding resources and how to ask for funding. So that's what I've seen might be more of a weakness if you're doing your postdoc abroad. Do your homework of informing yourself. If that's the case. I don't see language barrier as such a big deal. And I think we are all here foreigner, you know, our other mother tongue here of our 4 people is not English. So I think the US is a very welcome place for this. So.
Yeah, but I would like to add to that and just say that it does help that if you're already within the country. If you did your last postdoc, I had a very competitive friend who was applying alongside me, but because he was in the UK and not in the US, he had to apply for more jobs.
Someone has a question. How long do you typically have to wait from the first round of Zoom interview to campus interview?
For me, it was for one job, it was 1 month, and the other one, because of the pandemic, it was 3. So yeah, it varies. Eva, would you know the answer?
Yeah, I don't know. We are not doing STEAM interviews, I think, this time. So we're not, depending on, if you get too many that you cannot decide, then you would do Zoom interviews. And it all depends on the bureaucracy in our university. So we are planning about 4 weeks because we cannot get the paperwork through. It's not that the search committee hasn't done its work, but it needs to go through the proper channels. So they're contacting the chair of the search committee. They would know what the timeline would be if you're anxious about it.
The next question is, do you require preliminary data for every objective you mention in your proposal? So if there is a biological question that has been addressed for some phenomenon in plant development, but you need to check another aspect, can you use this biological question even if you don't have any preliminary data?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As long as you have some preliminary data, that would look good, but mostly it's a research statement, right? So only once you get there will you do it. So approach is more important than having the data itself already.
Yeah, remember that you need some to make you credible that you could start working right away. But remember, you will have some money that the university will give you to get towards that preliminary data. So having a plan to get that preliminary data is more important. It's important too.
There's a question. Is it important to tailor the research statement to the job? Do you consider the resources that might be available?
In my experience, I had to tailor this cover letter the most for every job. The research statement, I very infrequently did I have to tailor it, because that is my expertise, right? How much can I change that? I can't, but the cover letter I could.
But there is a point of where, you know, you go to a place where they have a lot of expertise, let's say in metabolite measurements, that you can propose things that you might not be able to do somewhere else. So it gives you a little bit of freeway. depending, you can emphasize some things differently, but generally I agree with Sonali that you might not, but yeah.
We have a question about if your research resembles a collaborator work in the department you are applying to, or you apply to the same department as your postdoc and PhD advisor, how do you stay competitive enough that there might be an overlap?
So I really envy people who got jobs in the same department as their postdoc advisors. You get so much help, and you already know it's not a steep learning curve anymore. But yeah, that one might be a big question. But I think that's something you need to discuss with your postdoc advisor before you start applying for the job, right? That I don't want to compete with you, and this is what I want to develop as my own research program, and that's why they will support your application. So this is something you want to discuss before.
Yeah, and it clearly needs to be different with few exceptions. So maybe your advisor is retiring soon and that department really wants somebody that continues that expertise. Then that would be it depends on the condition, but I would say an overlap is always a minus point. It will always put you in a weak position, even if you're awesome. If there's no clear indication from the call that that's the specific expertise they want, and or you have clearly separated from your advisor. So I have to say you should be really careful doing that and talking to the people. I mean, you are in the same department, so go and talk to the chair and say, oh, how you what do you think about this?
And so there's a question that asks, in a standard research statement, that is no more specific descriptions like the ones described in the talk, how much should be focused on previous or current research versus future work at the hiring institution?
Because for me, because I am presenting my track record, I did emphasize more on what I have already done. And then the future objectives and methodology were just a couple of sentences. But I try to highlight my track record as much as possible and how it was leading into what I plan to do next.
Yeah, the ones that I've seen that you have half, so you have 1 page or 1/3 of your previous track record, particularly your more past track record could be less. If you're talking about your PhD, then your postdoc, maybe the postdoc work is the one that gives you the background for your future. So it's basically your background introduction to your future research. So it should be a significant amount of space. And it's not a grant proposal, but you need to support it. And as Sonali said, you need to sell your track record because that's what you have.
Our next question is how to basically draft a research statement if you have less publication or your publication are not perfectly matched to the proposed research. Can we cite other researchers?
Oh yeah, don't be afraid to. But I just said don't overdo it. It's okay if the primary findings were made by someone else. Credit is very important. But so what was the question? First question, Miriam?
I think the question is if someone doesn't have enough publication, right, how they can basically draft their own research statement based on the other people's work.
Yeah. Even if you don't have many publications, if you have few impactful ones, just talk about the research there. And what was the new thing that you added to science? It matters too. The number that always matter. Mm-hmm.
Definitely highlighting too much of other work, base your future work on work of others will weaken your statement. So make sure you highlight your expertise. This is a selling document, that you need to sell yourself, and your publications are your products. So you need to sell those to move on.
So I think we are going to wrap up the Q&A and we'll actually conclude this webinar. And next slide, please, Sonali. So we will have some concluding remarks by Mariam.
So basically, based on the comments that we heard from our panelists and great tips and do's and don'ts. So writing a research statement is difficult. So be mindful to basically budget enough time and revise it for each job application, and write about a research program that you're personally interested in and it's unique, but also doable to ensure the funding in the future. And another, I think, take-home messages is keep multiple versions of the research statements, right, to basically match different universities during your job hunt. So we also provided a Q&A, a QR code, for the survey. So that we are going to basically share after the webinar with the participants. Please make sure to take the survey. So this helps us to understand what we should do for our next webinar. And there are some helpful links that provides more resources about how to draft your research statement and more tips. And I remember that someone was asking where can I buy the book that I think Sonali was talking about that once. So can you elaborate on that one, Sonali?
Amazon.
Yes. So,
yeah, I want to mention that maybe if there are questions that were unanswered, we can save the chat and we can answer them when we post the slides. We can try to ask, Sonali and I can answer those if there are many that remained unanswered.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. That's great. So next, please.
Great. I just want to quickly kind of thank again all of you for joining us today. I know you guys are probably busy and I know it's a Friday, so thank you for spending part of your Friday with us. And again, a very, very special thank you to our speakers and our moderator today for hosting and facilitating this really, really informative webinar. And I hope everyone have a great weekend and we'll see you at our next webinar. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.